Hello, second grade, and welcome to Unit 5, Week 1. Let's go ahead and get started with our vocabulary for this week. Our first vocabulary word is the word champion. A champion is a person who won a contest or a race. They're the winner. So another word for winner is champion. There's synonyms. So an example sentence we have here is Maya won and became the new champion. Your second word is the word determined. If you determined something, that means you decided it. So determined and decided here are synonyms also. The boy determined which books to check out of the library. That means he decided or he picked which ones to check out of the library. So if you determined something, you chose it or you decided on it. Next, we have the word issues. Issues are important problems or topics that people are talking about. So if there's an important issue right now, we can talk about global warming is an important issue. Deforestation is an important issue. It's something that's going on that's important that have people talking. Next, we have the word promises. Promises are things that you tell people that you are going to do. You make your intention to do that thing. And that's kind of like giving someone reassurance or telling them that for sure you're planning on doing this thing. That's a promise. So if you made a promise to do all of your chores before you went out to play, that means you're telling your parents, most likely, that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I do this thing. Next, we have the word votes. So votes are basically choices by people when you have to choose or when you have to elect someone, you vote for that thing. So you can vote for opinions in your class. You guys can vote which game you want to play for indoor recess, where everyone decides from the choices that they have which one they want, and you count the votes, and the option that got the most votes or the most people wanted is usually the one that people will go with. Next, we have the word volunteered. So when you volunteer to do something, you're saying that you will do it and you'll do it basically for free. You're not asking anyone to pay you to do it. When you volunteer to do something, that means you offer to do it for someone. So you may volunteer to help your friend pull weeds out of their garden, or you may volunteer to help clean up the playground at school. Next, we have the word responsibility. So if you have a responsibility to do something, it's your duty or your job. It's something that you're in charge of. So if it's your responsibility to clean your room, that means you're in charge of making sure that your room is clean. If you have a responsibility to finish your homework before bedtime, that means you're in charge of doing that. That's your job. And last, we have the word rights. So rights are things that laws say that you can do or you can have. So you have the right to speak freely, to say your opinion without being worried. You have the right to go to school. You have the right, to feel safe in your environment. Next, let's go into our spelling words. Now we're going to cover some more diphthongs this week, and we have the ow sound that we're going to be working in. So the ow sound can be spelled O-U or O-W. So the ow sound that we're focusing on is like the sound you hear in the word cow or cloud or ouch. It has to say ow, not ooh. So our words here for this week are sound, mound, cloud, shout, pound, clown, brown, crown, howl, growl, chair, where, bin, myself, and pushed. So notice the words when you're writing them down when you go to do your 3 times each. Notice how they're spelled, which ones have the OU, which ones have the OW. Next, we're going to get into our ELA and grammar notes for this week. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about are irregular plurals. Now, remember, a plural noun is a noun that talks about more than one thing. So not one cat, but many cats. Not one dog, but maybe 2 dogs. Not one house, but lots of houses. So regular plurals have an S or an ES added to the end of that word, like cat becomes cats, and house becomes houses. Now we have things that we call irregular plural nouns, which means not regular. That IR in the beginning of irregular, that prefix means not. So irregular plural nouns or not regular plural nouns don't have an S or ES at the end of them. Instead, one kind of irregular noun that we're going to talk about is the kind that changes its spelling. So it's not just adding an S or ES, we change the word into a new word. So child becomes children, man becomes men, mouse becomes mice, person becomes people, goose becomes geese, tooth becomes teeth, foot becomes feet, life becomes lives. And there's many, many, many more examples. So a lot of these are words that you're familiar with already, but you may not have known that there is a special word for them or a special name for them, and they're called irregular plural nouns. So these are going to show up in your practice book and your worksheets for this week. Next, we're going to talk about a few common suffixes. Now, prefixes and suffixes are both parts that we add onto a word, and they come from the word affix. So affix means to stick onto something or to attach to something. So what do they do? So prefixes and suffixes change the meaning of the word that they're attached to. They modify or they make that meaning a little bit different than the original word. Now, a suffix is a word part that's added to the end of a word. And again, it'll change the meaning. So the three suffixes we're going to focus on for this week are the suffix full, li, and less. So full means full of something. So if a picture is colorful, it's full of colors. If someone is being very careful, that means they're doing something with a lot of care, right? They're not throwing it around, they're being very gentle. Someone who is joyful is full of joy or happiness. The opposite, someone who is sorrowful is full of sorrow or sadness. Someone who's thankful is full of thanks or gratitude, right? You feel very thankful when someone does something nice for you. So what word would you use to describe something that is full of beauty? You would say that thing is beautiful. Our next suffix is li, L-Y. So when we add this to the end of a word, it tells us that that is the way that something was done. So if someone is talking loudly, they're talking in a loud way. If someone is talking sadly, they're talking in a sad way. If someone is working quietly, they're working in a quiet way. If they are walking around nervously, they're walking around kind of in a nervous way, kind of looking around, not sure where they are. So what word would you use to describe something that's being done in a happy way? You would say it's being done happily. And last we have the suffix less. So less means without. It's the opposite of full, right? Full means full of something, and less means it doesn't have that thing. So if something is done in a thoughtless way, that means the person who did it wasn't thinking when they were doing it. They probably made a mess of it. If you feel very hopeless, if you're feeling very hopeless, that means you feel like you don't have any hope. And if you are doing something if you're doing something in a careless way, that means you're not being careful. It's the opposite of careful. So what word would you use to describe someone who is not afraid of anything? You would call them fearless. All right, next we're going to get into pronouns. Now, pronouns take the place of a noun. So remember, a noun is any person, place, or thing. So pronouns are words that take the place of that noun. So I'm going to give you a few examples of pronouns. These are things that you use all the time when you're talking or reading or writing, but now we're going to put a name to them so you know what they are. So some of the pronouns that we're going to learn about are the pronouns he, she, it, we, they, I, and you. So these are going to be our pronouns that we're going to focus on this week. Now, we use he to take the place of a singular noun that is talking about a boy or a man. So he is one, right? Just like a man is one or a boy is one. They have to match your pronoun. The word that you're replacing for the name of that boy or the name of that man has to match in how many they are, and if it's male or female, if it's a boy or girl. So I don't use she to describe a boy, right? I use he to describe a boy. So instead of saying Bob went to the store, I say he went to the store because Bob is one boy. So he That pronoun he is used for one boy. And I use she to take the place of a singular noun. Singular, remember, means one, that takes the place of a noun that is talking about a girl or a woman. So instead of saying Khadija has a new kitten, I can say she has a new kitten. So she takes the place of the name Khadija. It is used to take the place of a singular noun that is a thing, right? Instead of saying the car is in the garage, I can say it is in the garage. It takes the place of the car, right? Because it is talking about one thing, and the one thing that we're talking about in this sentence is the car. Now, for the pronoun we use we use the word we to take the place of a noun and a pronoun when we're one of them. So if I say my sister and I played tag, I say we played tag. So it's taking the place of a noun, which is my sister, and I, which is the pronoun that I use when I talk about myself. So my sister and I played tag, I say we played tag. I use they when I'm taking the place of a plural of a plural noun. So two or more people or things. So instead of saying my teachers wore matching costumes, I can say they wore matching costumes. So they is used to take the place of a plural noun, more than one. Now, I use the pronoun I when I'm talking about myself, when I'm using my own name. So I don't come to you and say, Miss Zena is going to the park. I say, I am going to the park. So you use I to replace your name when you're talking to somebody, because it would sound silly if when you were telling someone something, you use your own name to talk about yourself. And last, we have the pronoun you. So you takes the place of the name of the person that you're talking to. So if I'm talking to Ahmad and I say Ahmad wants to play hide and seek, I say you want to play hide and seek. So you takes the place of the person's name that you're talking to. I takes the place of your name. They takes the place of the group that you're talking about. We takes the place of you plus another person or another group that you're talking about. It takes the place of one thing. She takes the place of one female or girl or woman, and he takes the place of one male or boy or man. So those are going to be your pronouns. I did color code them for you so that you can see how they're being replaced. The nouns are all in purple, the pronouns are all in green, and the definitions are there for you. Now, the last thing we're going to cover is something we've talked about before. We're going to talk about quotation marks. Now, quotation marks are used at the beginning and the end of the exact words that a person is saying. What they do is they hug those words and they tell you everything inside of here are the words that that person said. So the first word in a quotation always begins with a capital letter. Think of it as its own sentence inside of your sentence, right? It has to begin with a capital letter. And it also has to have its end punctuation. So just like we're going to think of it like its own sentence hiding inside these quotation marks, that means every sentence begins with a capital letter and ends with some kind of punctuation mark. So quotation marks look like two small commas that go around the words, but they're on top. They're not on the bottom on the line. So over here, you can see that I have my opening quotation marks and I start with a capital letter. Where are my shoes? Question mark. And then I close the quotation marks because those are all the words. And then my ending over here, Hamza said, this tells me the speaker. Who is it that's talking? Who said these words? So either right before the quote or right after the quote, you're going to find someone's name or you're going to be referring to a person. And that's the person that said those words that are sitting and hiding inside of these quotation marks. The words that are being hugged by the quotation marks are the words that were spoken by that person. So again, over here, we're going to open new quotation marks because it's going to be a new thing that's being said. We're going to start with another capital letter. There by the door, comma, and then we close the quotation mark, said mom. So over here, inside of this is our quote. The quote is the thing that the person said. Begins with a capital letter, has an end punctuation mark, and it's hugged by these quotation marks on the outside. And then at the end, it tells us who said it. Here's another example. I can't wait to go to the pool, said Alia. So I can't wait to go to the pool with the exclamation mark. Remember, this is its own little sentence that's hiding and being hugged by these quotation marks. Begins with a capital letter, ends with a punctuation, and then we have who said it, right? It tells us right after, said Alia. So we know that these words that were inside the quotation marks were the words that Alia said. Dad said, comma, we open the quotation marks, start with a capital letter again, please grab your bag. So we can see we have our quotation marks. Inside, we start with a capital letter. We end with a punctuation mark before we close those quotations. So these are important things for you to pay attention to. Next, we're going to get into our weekly stories, and our first weekly story is a fun one. It's called Grace for President. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy this story. Let's go ahead and give it a listen.
Genre: realistic fiction. Grace for President by Kelly DiPuccio. Illustrated by Lewin Pham. Essential question: what do good citizens do? Read about a class that learns about voting and elections. One Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all of the president's pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. Where are the girls? That is a very good question, said Mrs. Barrington. The truth is, our country has never had a woman president. No girl president? Ever? Grace asked. No, I'm afraid not, said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. No girls? Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. Yes, Grace? I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to be president. Several students in the class laughed. Well, I think that's a star-spangled idea, Grace, said Mrs. Barrington. In fact, we can have our own election right here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. The snickering in the room stopped. Grace smiled. Would anyone else like to run for president? Mrs. Barrington asked the class. Nobody raised their hand. Becoming president was going to be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. In the name of democracy, I have invited Mr. Waller's class to join our election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be their presidential candidate. Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school's spelling bee champion. His experiments always took a blue ribbon at the science fair, and he was captain of the soccer team. Becoming president wasn't going to be so easy after all, Grace thought. The teachers put the names of all 50 states and the District of Columbia into a hat. Everyone except for Grace and Thomas got to choose a state. I'm Texas, said Anthony. I'm New Hampshire, said Rose. I'm Michigan, said Robbie. What does the number 17 mean? Each state is assigned a number of electoral votes. That number is determined by how many people live in that state, said Mrs. Barrington. Each of you will be a representative for your state. Altogether, our country has 538 electoral votes, Mr. Waller explained. On election day, the candidate who receives 270 electoral votes or more wins the election. Why 270? Asked Rose. That's more than half of all the electoral votes, Mr. Waller said. Becoming president really wasn't going to be so easy, Grace thought. Grace came up with a campaign slogan. Make history, vote Grace Campbell for president. Thomas came up with his own campaign slogan. Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job. Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises. A peaceful school, no bullies. A cleaner school, no littering. Better hot lunches. No more fish stick tacos. Thomas made up his own list of promises. Free tutoring, free soccer lessons, fish stick tacos every week. Grace made campaign posters and buttons. Thomas made posters and buttons too. Each week, the teacher set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. Polls were taken. Voters were making their choices. Grace continued to campaign. At recess, she gave speeches. During lunch, she handed out free cupcakes. After school, she held rallies. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't worried. He had cleverly calculated that the boys held slightly more electoral votes than the girls. At recess, Thomas studied his spelling words. During lunch, he worked on his latest science experiment. After school, he played soccer. Even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad. She organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. In early November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary hosted a special Election Day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage as the school band began to play. Henry was the first representative to approach the microphone. The Yellowhammer state of Alabama casts its 9 electoral votes for Thomas Cobb. Fletcher said, the last frontier state of Alaska casts its 3 electoral votes for the best man for the job, Thomas Cobb. Hannah called out, the Grand Canyon state of Arizona casts its 10 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. And so it went. State after state after state cast their electoral votes. The scoreboard in the gymnasium kept track of the totals. The voting demonstration was quickly coming to an end. Clara approached the podium. The Badger State of Wisconsin cast its 10 votes for my best friend, Grace Campbell. Grace looked at the scoreboard. Thomas had 268 electoral votes. She had 267. There was only one state still unaccounted for, Wyoming. Thomas grinned. Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's handmade flag. Sam didn't say a word. "What are you waiting for?" Thomas whispered. The band stopped playing. All eyes were on Wyoming. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. The equality state of Wyoming casts its 3 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers and a few boos. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. With 270 electoral votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Grace hugged Sam. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Sam handed Grace his flag. "Because," he said, "I thought you were the best person for the job." The following week, the students in Mrs. Barrington's class were preparing for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood at the front of the room and glanced at the poster still hanging on the wall. My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States. This time, everyone believed that she would. Genre: narrative nonfiction. Compare texts. Read about a young citizen who is helping others. Helping to make smiles. Matthew Stevenson lives in Texas. He has a disability. It makes his muscles weak. People with Matthew's disability can have trouble walking, sitting, and writing. Some use a wheelchair. Camp Smiles. During the summer, Matthew goes to Camp Smiles. It is an Easter Seals camp for children with disabilities. Children with special needs often can't go to other camps. Other camps cannot help them meet their needs. At Camp Smiles, there is special gear. Each camper has a buddy to help him or her. Children at Camp Smiles are able to ride horses, play basketball, and swim. Camp may be the only place where they can do those activities. Matthew Stevenson at Camp Smiles. Matthew's Camp Challenge. Matthew had a great time at Camp Smiles. He wanted other children like him to get to go to camp. Not all kids can afford to go to camp. Matthew wanted to change that. He decided to challenge people to give money. The money will pay for 30 children to go to Camp Smiles. Matthew showed responsibility. He is involved in his community. He is helping to make children with disabilities smile. A good citizen is someone who is respectful of the rights of others, responsible, involved in his or her community, thoughtful of others' feelings. How are you a good citizen? A Camp Smiles camper with her buddy.
Okay, that takes us to the end of our literature anthology book. Let's go ahead and get started on our reading and writing workshop book stories.
Genre: realistic fiction. A difficult decision. My best friend Paul and I were excited to go to the park after school. The park had a new fort. The parks department let the kids choose what kind of equipment to build, and the fort got the most votes. After school, Mom and I met Paul and his dad at the park. Paul and I raced to the top of the tower. "I win! I'm the champion!" I shouted. "Look, Paul, someone left the newest game master here. It's mine now." Paul raised his eyebrows and looked thoughtful. "Wyatt, you cannot keep that game master," he said. "You have a responsibility to return it. It is your duty." I asked, "Haven't you ever heard the saying, 'Finders keepers, losers weepers'? I have rights. I found it, so I am claiming it." "You can do whatever you want, Wyatt, but you know it's wrong to keep it," Paul said. Then he added, "Whenever there are issues like this at school, you're the one who helps solve the problems. Now you aren't taking your own advice." Then Paul added, "I volunteered my thoughts. If you don't want to take the help I offered, there's nothing I can do." Paul was right. I couldn't keep the game because it wasn't mine. The person who lost it would be upset. I cleared my throat and said in my best deep voice, "I've determined that you're right." "I'm delighted you decided to do the right thing," said Paul. We told my mother what happened. She walked around the park with us so we could try to find the owner of the game. Soon we saw a boy and his mom looking for something. He looked hopeless, and he burst into tears when we asked him if the game was his. "Yes," he wailed. "I lost my game master a little while ago. I should have been more careful." Afterward, Mom and I walked home. I was glad I returned the toy to the boy. So I made a promise to myself to always try to do the right thing. Now that is a vow I can keep.
All right, that takes us to the end of our stories. Now we're going to talk about our comprehension strategy, which is to summarize. Now, when we summarize a story, we're telling the important parts that happen to it. So think about when you're telling your friend about a really nice story that you read or a really cool movie that you watched. You're not telling them every single word of it. You're just giving them a general idea of what happened. And that's what a summary is. After we talk about that, we're going to talk about point of view. So the point of view of the person that's telling the story is basically when that person is telling you their story, but they're also telling you how they feel about it. They're telling you to you from their perspective, as if they're the ones who are sharing all of the events. So it's not just kind of hearing the story from outside. It's someone that's telling it themselves. So a lot of times in those stories, you'll hear them saying, "I did this," or "we went here," or "this was my, this is my house," or "this is, we did this, in my backyard." So the point of view is the character or the speaker telling you something about a thing that they experienced, about their own experience. So let's go ahead and listen.
Summarize. To summarize a story, you tell only the most important events of the story in your own words. This helps you remember what you have read. Find text evidence. After reading page 335 of A Difficult Decision, I can summarize what happens at the beginning of the story. Win. "I'm the champion," I shouted. "Look, Paul, someone left the newest game master here. It's mine now." Paul raised his eyebrows and looked thoughtful. "Wyatt, you cannot keep that game master," he said. "You have a responsibility to return it. It is your duty." I asked, "Haven't you ever heard the saying, 'Finders keepers, losers weepers'? I have rights. I found it, so I am claiming it." I read that Wyatt finds a handheld game at the park and he wants to keep it. His friend Paul wants Wyatt to find the owner. Point of view. A character telling the story has feelings about the events. This is the character's point of view. The words I, my, me, and mine tell who is speaking. Find text evidence. When I read the second paragraph on page 335 of A Difficult Decision, I can tell Wyatt is talking. I will look for clues to his point of view. Graphic organizer. Character. Wyatt. Clue. It's mine now. Point of view. Wyatt thinks he should keep a game he found. Realistic fiction. A Difficult Decision is realistic fiction. Realistic fiction has characters that talk and act like real people, has a setting that could be a real place, can be told in the first person. Find text evidence. I can tell that A Difficult Decision is realistic fiction. Wyatt and Paul could be real people. I also see that it is told by Wyatt in the first person. Story structure. The story uses first-person point of view. The character uses I, my, and me to tell his thoughts and feelings. Suffixes. To understand the meaning of a word you do not know, separate the word from a suffix, such as ful or less, to figure out the word's meaning. Find text evidence. I am not sure what thoughtful means. The root word is thought, which has to do with thinking about something. I see the suffix ful, which means full of. I think the word thoughtful means having a lot of thoughts. Paul raised his eyebrows and looked thoughtful.
All right, that takes us to the end of our notes for this week. If you guys have any questions, definitely let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.